day of our retreat. 4th day, okay. So, what I hear, you have already quite some experience what it means to be on kind of self-retreat, online, supported, but still also very much on your own, trying out what works, what doesn't work, how to combine it with the duties you have at home or with other people. And so for me, this feels like a very special and very interesting retreat experience. Because I'm in the same situation like you, at home, not alone, but luckily very much supported. And Bianca is also in retreat, part-time, full-time, not completely clear, but more full-time than part-time, but there are some duties. And so in some way, this place here has been transformed to a kind of retreat center. Or as I um, read on the first day, like some cave in the Himalayas. But here, this room is quite a big cave. Maybe too big for a cozy cave. It's also a kind of studio for me. It's meditation room, it's broadcasting studio. And I think many interesting qualities can be developed, but also what one can see in such a situation is the resources that one already has. And it does, what I see also, help if some of you have already sat on retreats. And that is resources, that's experience that also can help, and help also in the sense of how to create the confines of a retreat. And even if the confines are different here, one has an idea what is somehow necessary. And on the other hand, the challenge can be how can one also be flexible and not compare it with the situation in a complete retreat center. I think it can also be interesting after the retreat, because maybe it has brought something home, because you're at home. But now we are in the midst of the retreat, and I would like to talk about a topic that is very much present in meditation practice, very important in meditation practice, and also in interviews again and again I hear that this is a topic. I have given this talk almost every year in Pian de Ciliegi because I think it's important. And it's about attitude. And there can be helpful attitudes in the practice, and there can be less helpful attitudes in the practice. But the most important is to be aware of attitudes. That's the first point. And so I would like to read this story, which this time I can read it in English without stopping and getting it translated. So I really enjoy reading it. It's a story from Korea, from a Korean monastery. And like in Korean monastery, also in Thai monasteries, for example, where I have stayed, or even in Burmese monasteries, one of the work of the monks there is to sweep the leaves. And that's a very important work because in the tropical countries, there are all year round a lot of leaves, especially this time now, March and April, which is the hot season. There are so many leaves. You are uh, sweeping it in the morning, and then in the afternoon again, everything is full of leaves because it's so hot and the tree le- are the leaves are falling down. So this young man is narrating about his experience with that monastery. He said, when I was 13, my family would send me up to the mountains around the monastery to collect plants that can be eaten and used for our evening meal. And this trip was the only work that I really enjoyed. Otherwise, I tried every trick I could to avoid work on my family's farm. I was still going to school, but school had no interest for me, and my anger was a welcome barrier not to learn anything a teacher was teaching. But occasionally, during my trips to collect food, I would pass the monastery where the monks were out and about sweeping the leaves from the many pathways. And the first time I saw the monks working, I was mesmerized watching them going about their work. For many months after, I would often stop for a while to watch them sweep. They went about their work silently and with an efficiency that seemed effortless. One day a monk walked up to me and asked what I was doing in the mountains. And immediately I became defensive and scared. I resented anyone who tried to get to know me. So instead of answering the question, I countered by asking what he was doing. The monk smiled and answered that he had been told to sweep and that he was just killing the time until he can return to his room for a nap. Ah, home late about his answer, and I was glad that he didn't seem any different than me. When I was required to do anything, my heart was never in it, and my attitude was that I was passing time until I could be excused. Taking a nap was certainly preferable. The next time I passed the monastery, on one of my foraging trips, another monk stopped his sweeping and also asked what I was doing. And again I resented the question. It felt like an intrusion. However, this time I didn't feel scared. Again, I deflected the question by asking what he was doing. And he answered that he was doing extra work in hope of being assigned to the kitchen, which was warm in the winter and always seemed to have 1 or 2 extra sweet rice cakes in the cupboard for the cooks to nibble on. Without saying anything, I nodded and left to continue on my trip. The monk's answer resonated with me since I too like to be warm, and eating rice cakes was one of my favorite activities, second only to sleeping. The next time I passed the monastery, a third monk asked me the same question. This time I was surprised that I was not defensive or resentful of being asked. However, again, I deflected the question back to him. He explained that he was sweeping as a spiritual discipline to help him overcome his anger. Later, as I walked the mountain trail with my bag of plants, I thought a kinship with this monk. Like me, he had anger. But I was perplexed that he would want to overcome it. For me, my anger protected me. A week later, I was again outside the monastery watching the monks sweep. Yet another monk came up to me. When he asked me what I was doing, I mumbled something about collecting plants. I doubt he could hear me. My voice was so faint. But I did muster up some strength to ask him what he was doing, and he replied he was beautifying the monastery so that others may be inspired in their work of spiritual transformation. Before I left him, I glanced down the well-swept paths and realized that part of the reason I was compelled to watch the monks sweep was that they seemed to be transforming the paths into something that made me feel peaceful. The next time I stood outside the monastery watching the monks, I was drawn to walk over to a fifth monk, and before he could ask me what I was doing, I asked. He looked at me with kind eyes, and after what seemed a long but quite soft silence, he explained that he was sweeping the paths to be at service to all who used the monastery, and in practicing this way, he hoped to find the ultimate peace. As I left the monastery that day, I thought his answer was strange, as I didn't understand what he meant by service and by peace. I certainly couldn't see how these had any value for me. The next time I visited the monastery was the last time. I had an unfamiliar feeling as I walked up into the mountains. Just before I reached the monastery, I guessed that I was looking forward to seeing the monks again, and I felt a one glow of gladness and anticipation of what I would find. When I arrived at the monastery, I walked right up to an old monk who seemed absorbed in his sweeping. I inquired what he was doing. As he answered, each of his words washed over me like cleansing water. He said, "Me? I'm not doing anything at all. My ego was swept away long ago. There is no I that does anything. Now the awakened life moves through my body, my heart, my mind, and my mouth. No, no one, there are no paths and to sweep, and there is no dirt to brush away." I was stunned by his answer, and before I could respond, he handed me the broom and walked away. I have been there ever since. So I like this story because I can also kind of relate to it. Because, well, maybe sweeping past, I would also have different attitudes, like trying to get away from it, and just if no one looks, I try to get out there, or just to do it so because I'm awaiting the end of it, or sometimes just doing it and just doing it. So, and it's not just sweeping paths, it's everything. It's actually in our life, whatever activities there are. What is the attitude we have? So, knowing like here in this story, they were all doing the same thing, sweeping forest paths, sweeping the leaves of the path. But everyone had a different attitude. So the same applies to the meditation practice. It applies to the daily activities that we have to do every day. So what is the attitude there? And there might be, if you have a look, changing attitudes, different attitudes. Maybe there are even attitudes that are reflected in the story that we find. Like just doing something but trying to get away of it. Or we do it because we hope to have some reward. Or we do it just because we do it without any expectation of whatsoever, and so on. And there has been, or there is a monastery in Burma where they do practice very much with this question throughout the day. And the question is something, what is my attitude towards this experience now? Or what is in the meditation practice, what is the attitude now in this towards this experience in meditation? So it has to do with, there is a certain experience and how do we relate to it? And this is one of common questions that meditation teachers are asking at times at interviews. If one is reporting certain mental state or certain physical sensations or pains or whatever, question, how did you relate to it? And there are different ways of relating to it. One is just to know it, just to even observe a certain interest. Another is trying to get rid of it. Another is to try to keep it away from yourself. Another is making big stories out of something, and so on, and so on. Well, there are a few attitudes that I have observed myself, and I have observed it with other meditators, that are maybe not so skillful, but often they are arising. So I'll start with those, and then I hopefully have time to also show one or two, of course, helpful attitudes. One of those monks and teachers of this monastery where they work a lot with attitude of the mind, Sayadaw Tejaniya. I want to quote him here. Please check your attitude before you begin sitting meditation. What kind of ideas or attitudes are you meditating with? Do you only want a peaceful state? Or do you want to learn about and understand what is happening? The mind can't be cool and calm when you want certain experiences other than what is happening in this present moment. The mind can't be cool and calm when you want certain experience other than what is happening in this present moment. And that's kind of paradox, because we want probably the mind to be cool and calm, but just wanting it, it doesn't help. It needs to really be present with what is happening in this present moment. And that, in a way, cools the mind down, not in a cold way, in a where one is separating from experience, but in a way that mind is less reactive, that there is less aversion, there is less wanting, and it can just be with whatever is experienced. However, there are some attitudes or inclinations of the mind that often arise, and we need to be aware of them. It's not bad. It's how the mind is, how the mind works. But it's good to know it, because it can be blocking. One is expectation. And of course we practice because we have expectation. Expectation that this kind of practice leads to more peace and to less to less suffering. But of course, if we hold on to this expectation moment by moment, then it can be a hindrance. If it's an expectation in the background that and coming together with faith and confidence, then we rather can step into whatever we experience. But we also have to see that expectation is something that will arise again and again for a long time. I know one monk in Thailand who, as far as I can uh, tell, or yes, as far as I can tell, uh, maybe most realized person that I've met. And I just remember him saying, hope is the last visitor. So the practice can be very refined. But the last visitor is hope, is expectation. So even in this fine, refined kind of practice, we again and again have to check when expectation is arising. Expectation that something might happen, whatever that is. It might be just a slight leaning into something, or just a thought of, oh, waiting for something special. Or at some other level, it can be that, like some meditator once would describe it, I feel like the cat at the mouse hole, waiting that the mouse comes out of this hole. And I feel like waiting that something special will arise. Huh. In Zen, in Zen, they have this saying, can you be with the nothing special? Just to be with the nothing special, mit dem Nicht-Besonderen. And there is some interesting thing that can happen. Like, if you can be with the nothing special, if you can really be with the nothing special, it becomes something special. Even just this breathing or rising and falling, or a sound or whatever, if you fully with it, it's it's not something that is not special. It's neither special nor not special. So one attitude can be leaning into experience that something will happen, thinking something should happen, waiting for something to happen, or just in a very subtle way to expect, or that some experience could be arise again because we have experiences from past meditations, from past retreats, and so on. We want to repeat it. So again, here expectation may arise, and it can be frustrating, especially when we're not knowing and noting expectation as just another mental phenomena. And look at these things when you see it they arise, but it also passes away. It's just another arising and passing phenomena, if we can check it. So when you find yourself like the cat in front of the mouse hole, then maybe remember that Zen saying of nothing special. Well, just be with the nothing special, and kind of stepping back a little bit. Or like I think Burmese or Sri Lankan monk was once calling it leaning back and watching Dhamma TV. Just watching Dharma TV. Because whatever arises, this is Dharma, uh, this is life. This is this body and mind, and this is the world. Another attitude that we might be aware of. One, I forgot one that still kind of fits towards expectation. And it is what I call the in order to mind. In order to. Something arises, maybe some sensations that you don't like. And maybe you have the experience that once you were observing it and it was going away, or you were breathing into it and it was going away. And then we try to do this again. So we're not really there to know what's going on, to really probe into it, but we're in order to. I know it, I note it, in order to go away, even this. So there's a slight aversion, slight of wanting to get rid of. And that's sometimes very subtle. Another attitude that can arise is, well, subtle clinging. There are pleasant experiences. We want to stay with the pleasant experience. And there are times when the so-called nivaranas, or 5 hindrances, are not there, or we are maybe through a storm of hindrances, and then often something opens up, and suddenly maybe just moments of deeper calm, or of being really connected with breathing, or even some joy arising in the practice because there is certain concentration, or the mind gets more clear or bright, or whatever. And so here, can we know it? Can we note it? But what about when the mind gets so excited and says, oh, great, now my mind is so calm, now my mind is so clear? That maybe there is some clinging. And often the clinging itself can also destroy it. One Canadian monk in Switzerland, he was living, he used to give this example, which is a little bit not so nice example. He called it the butterfly syndrome. Imagine a butterfly passing by here, and then you see, oh, such a nice butterfly. What happens with the butterfly if you grasp it? No butterfly anymore, no beauty anymore. And so in the same way, grasping of beautiful mental states can also, in a sense, destroy them. But it doesn't mean that when we don't grasp them, they will stay forever. Of course, it's all changing. And it's also important to really learn that and observe that they're all including universal characteristic of change. But somehow there's something in us that might think, if I just reach that, if I just come to this state, then I have it, then I am there. And in that moment when you think, ah, now I'm there, now I've got it. Oh, that's the moment where be aware what happens. That's often the moment of clinging. No, also this may change. No, it doesn't just may change, it will change. So it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there, but uh, stay awake, stay also here mindful. Another kind of grasping that can happen is that we grasp pleasant thoughts, pleasant images or thoughts. Some meditators would at times tell me that they have something like an inner Vergnügungspark, amusement park, an inner amusement park. And even one meditator once said, "Oh, my practice was going quite smooth and being with the rising and falling, very clear. And then it was like that it's like on a highway, and then there was this sign, amusement park. And then she would follow the sign amusement park and go into her own, always the same kind of amusement park. And of course, no mindfulness anymore there. And another time, she would be with the rising and falling, It's quite clear, and there's quite some mindfulness and concentration. But then there's again this impulse, oh, could go to the amusement park. This sign, amusement park. Just go off to the right. But this time what happened is that she was aware of it, of the impulse of getting to her own inner amusement park, and she was just observing the impulse and just continuing rising, falling. So here there is sometimes this choice, but sometimes we're really getting caught in the inner amusement park. If this happens, please observe, and there is no will to get away from there. Observe how the mind is sticking. It is said sensual desire or being, it has some sticky quality. You want to stick on that. Can you know that? Can you see the sticky quality? And maybe sometimes it needs some reflection, or sometimes a good way to at some point get back from the amusement park is when there is just a pause between certain thoughts and images. Use this pause to come back. Another attitude that can be observed in meditators, and not just others, I can observe it in me as well at times, is a kind of practicing in a more defensive way. It could be, for example, when at times certain pains arise. And then one thinks, okay, I have to sit like this, then the pain will not come. I have to sit exactly like this. And so it's another kind of in order to mind to avoid something. And this defensiveness, usually it makes one tight. And it often has the result that one gets even more pain, that one is even more tense. I even know one meditator who did several retreats, and on the first retreat he had quite a number of pains, and he was so defensive of how he could sit, and always occupied with how to sit to avoid the pains. But in fact he had pains 90% of the time. And for some reason, I don't know why, 1 year later he came back on one retreat. I thought he would never come back. And on that retreat it was the same. And just after probably third retreat, he found out how defensive he was. How he, on a subtle level, was always occupied with how to avoid pain. And the interesting thing, when he discovered that and he put on this courage to simply arrive, sit in a posture that one could call good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, just good enough. And then, interestingly, in that retreat, the pains would get less and less. So maybe be aware when sometimes this attitude of kind of defensiveness is there, to avoid something. Or defensive in the sense that one doesn't want to open into the unknown. But at times in meditation practice, it's an opening into the unknown. We don't know what's coming next. But it's also not important. It's important that we are really present in the here and now, not so much about the next. Now, now, now. As the Buddha says, be clearly aware of the presently arisen state. The future is not there yet. The past is already gone. Be aware of each presently arisen state. Well, there's a relatively famous story of Milarepa, the Tibetan yogi who practiced in a cave for years. And the story is that one time he was in this cave and demons came to the cave. I think 3 demons. And he was in the cave and the demons were at the entrance, and so he couldn't get away. So Milarepa thought, oh, what can I do? I've learned that naming the demon by the name, it can make him weak. So he was naming the demons with their name. But this helped only with one demon, and one demon shrinked and he just went away. So the second strategy of Milarepa was that he would do metta, loving kindness for the demons. May you be well, may you be happy, may you be at peace. And one of the 2 demons was shrinking, getting smaller, and then going away. So it worked. But there was still one demon. And this demon had very, very big mouth. And he was scary. So what did Milarepa do? Neither metta nor naming the demon helped. So what he did is he jumped. He jumped directly into the mouth of the demon. And in that moment, when he really jumped into the mouth of the demon, it made plop and the demon disappeared. So sometimes it needs really to face straight there. And there are quite some demons that may arise sometimes. Sometimes certain sensations, sometimes difficult emotions that we're trying to avoid, get around it, and so on. But it is important that we know our resources. I would not suggest all the time just to jump into. Sometimes this is good. But sometimes if you feel the demon is extremely big, overwhelming you, it is good to retreat. So this is also wisdom, to know when to retreat, when to put your attention somewhere else. Another attitude that sometimes is overlooked is that meditators sometimes have an inner censorship. And this inner censorship would kind of exclude certain experiences as if it's not part of the meditation. As if meditation is just a certain scope and something else is not meditation. For example, I had several times on long retreats an experience that over the time concentration, the mindfulness, the everything developed well. Maybe up and down, but it was really a sense of getting into it, getting deeper and developing. And then, and it could be even after 1 or 2 months of practice, really, really uh, uh, very fine practice. And then it felt like it's all falling apart. It felt like I forgot how to meditate. I can't meditate anymore. I thought, oh, and I'm I'm teaching meditation. I can't meditate anymore. Nothing works anymore. It's just full of, I don't know, restlessness, desire, whatever, and no, and even no motivation to meditate and nothing. And if I do, it doesn't work. And I just would like to shift my posture or to go from one place to another, trying if it's working in this corner better than in that corner, and this all didn't help. So then one easily thinks, no, I can't meditate anymore. This is not meditation. This is also meditation, when nothing else goes anymore. That's often the place where, the important place, where really something can open, where the heart can open. So don't think when nothing goes anymore that this is not practice. And the interesting thing is that an hour later, or maybe a day later, it's possible again. So also these states are passing. And it's also part of the practice. So. Now I should about one attitude that also might be helpful. And this is called atapi. And I would translate it as practicing with full-heartedly. That could be to practice full-heartedly. And Buddha is quoting this in a discourse about mindfulness, where he speaks of actually he uses three words that are connected with mindfulness. And it's atapi, and satima, and sampajana. And satima means to remember. It's more this part of mindfulness where you remember to be present. There's some teacher I very much respect, Joseph Goldstein, uses to say, it's easy to be mindful, but it's not so easy to remember it. And so in practicing to remember it. Many, many times. But then there is also this quality where sometimes it needs more than just remembering it. It means to face something wholeheartedly, even if it's difficult. Not in order to meditate it away, not to step up effort in order to get rid of it, but rather just to see its face and to see into the truth of it. So one aspect of this practicing full-heartedly is to sometimes, as Sada Upandita would say, sometimes rushing towards an object. Because, for example, if there are thoughts, and these thoughts could easily develop into some emotions. It's a chain of thoughts and then emotions are there. If you're not rushing towards these thoughts, once the train has started, it's not so easy to stop it. A train that just started rolling, you can stop. But once the train has some momentum, then it is not so easy to stop it. This is why to be alert, whatever comes into the mind, and to see it early enough would be helpful. Of course, not always this is possible, and you don't need to scold yourself if it's not possible. But still, there is some sense of urgency that could be arise in order to suffer less, because so much of the suffering just here, it just comes from our own thoughts. So see if you can check it when they are arising or as soon as possible. And then it helps to also really connect with the physical object or with the rising and falling or with the breathing, because when we really can connect with it and mindfulness gets a certain continuity, easier and faster we can see when we're not connected anymore, but some thoughts, some emotions are arising. And that also is important in the daily activities, that we remember again and again to do it full-heartedly with our attention. And when also in the daily activities, thoughts and train of thoughts arise like in the formal meditation, to be aware of that and maybe not let it go for a long time wherever it likes. So in this context, I think tomorrow at some point I will also speak a bit about emotions and how to deal mindfully with emotions, because they're an important part. So how to strengthen that sense of urgency. As I once said, reflecting on the purpose of the practice, reflecting why do we practice. And one also could reflect about the rarity of the opportunity. And I think we can especially be aware how rare the opportunity is, because we are now not in the perfect opportunity, like being in a retreat center or whatever. But still, it's a good opportunity. And there are people who at these times don't have this opportunity, like you. And then maybe also reflect on how important this heart and mind is, because everything comes from the heart, everything comes from the mind. So can we be aware of it? Can we learn to understand it? Can we be present with it? There is, if I find this, very nice quote by one of the forest monks of Thailand. Actually, they call it the father of the forest monk tradition in Thailand. Quite a long time ago, in the beginning or middle of the last century, Ajahn Mun, he would say, all of all the many things that people value and care for in the world, the mind is the most precious. In fact, the mind is the foremost treasure in the whole world. So be sure to look after it well, to realize the mind's true nature. To realize the mind's true nature is to realize the Dharma. And understanding the mind is the same as understanding the Dharma. Once the mind is known, then the Dharma in its entirety is known. Arriving at the truth about one's mind is the attainment of Nibbana. Clearly, the mind is a priceless possession that should never be overlooked. And it is in this mind that also all these different attitudes toward present experience, towards meditation itself, are arising. And so let us again just remember at times being aware, what is the attitude now? Is it a skillful attitude? Is it an unskillful attitude? I would like to end this with another quote by Sayadaw Tejaniya. And he says, we all have wrong attitudes. We cannot help having them. So do not try to have the right attitude, but try to recognize if you have the wrong attitude instead. It is important to be aware when you have the right attitudes, but it is even more important to recognize and investigate your wrong attitudes. Try to understand your wrong attitudes. Find out how they affect your practice and see how they make you feel. Keep checking to see what state of mind you are practicing with. So, I think we'll leave it here today, and yeah, just at the right time. And I think now there is time for some break, or even better, after a short break, to have some walking meditation and then joining for the last meditation at the end of